So I want to welcome Maike Luiken, John Havens, and Christopher Whitt from IEEE. Welcome to all of you, and it's a real pleasure to have you three contribute to this day around transboundary issues. And I'm going to start maybe with Maike to give a bit of perspective on the role of IEEE. We heard a little bit this morning when you were with us early, but for those who didn't have a chance to hear kind of the high-level presentation of IEEE's role, and then we'll move to Chris and John.
So thank you very much, Frederick. Thank you very much for the opportunity. We actually have prepared a slide deck that we are going to be sharing. So with your permission, I will dive through the slide deck, and that includes a high-level overview of IEEE.
Wonderful.
Assuming this will work here right now.
You should have all opportunity to share since you're co-host.
Yeah, except my deck doesn't show up, which is weird. Let's try again. That's the first. Oh, there we go.
Okay, wonderful.
I think so. So if I move that to...
I think you need to go to view. I think you need to go to view and then hit view.
I just want to move it.
There we go. Yep.
Screen.
There we go. Full screen.
Right,
yep.
Full screen. That's where I was trying to get to. Yes, but it didn't let me find it before. So
you're there.
Thank you. As usual, we all have to pass one, presentation 101. Okay, so thank you very much. And I'd like to start by introducing a new initiative from IEEE, from the IEEE Standards Association, called Planet Positive 2030. And so we have in the IEEE Standards Association a program that's a Sustainable Infrastructures and Community Development Program. And the Planet Positive 2030 is an initiative within that program. And I have the honor and pleasure to share this initiative, and to John Havens, who you see on the screen, is the staff lead from IEEE SA, and Christopher Whitt, who is also with us today, is a chair of one of the committees within the Planet Positive 2030 initiative. So let's talk about the context, and I've heard quite a bit about the context today in which we are working. And for us, we set the context of global challenges, and we have global crises, and we have a climate emergency. So what type of pain points are pushing us the hardest? The hardest, I think, right now is the impacts of climate change. The most urgent to address, and that's up for debate in terms of most urgent, is the continuing increases of GHG emissions in the atmosphere, and hence further global warming, and of course also ongoing pollution. The reason I put a caveat on most urgent is because it really depends on each of our points of view, what we consider the most urgent. If we look at the long term, then of course, mitigation of GHG emissions today with our current knowledge certainly appear to be the most urgent item that we need to address. But that's not to diminish any of the others, like the need for affordable, clean and renewable energy, reliable, resilient energy supply for all, to address the lack of water. We do not have ubiquitous access to water, as we have heard from so many, and the threat of less access to water is mounting dangerously. So that is another big topic. The growth of waste, and a way to address that problem and potentially the resource problem by using circular economy approaches. And on the human side, of course, the lack of equity and inclusion. So we can go on. There are many other items in this list. And I think whenever we are trying to address a single problem, we need to look at the field around us and look at which other solutions we can pull along by focusing on a single item. We should never lose sight of the other problems that go along with it. So to put it in very simple terms, we are really in need of and we are in urgent need of, and we are ready for solutions that are really addressing these crises and these challenges. And Mark Carney happens to be also Canadian, wrote a book called Values, and he essentially parts the issue down to us requiring three types of technologies or innovations. One would be engineering and technology, second would be political, and the third is financial, and not in no particular order really. And from the IEEE point of view, our focus is on the engineering and technological solutions. So the challenge then is to try to find ways to avoid the global warming to go beyond the 1.5 best case scenario that has been 1.5 degrees, I should say, above pre-industrial levels, a scenario that has been mapped out by the IPCC. So we are looking we're staring in the face of potential climate disasters, massive ecosystem destruction, if we cannot curb the temperature rise at 1.5 C above pre-industrial levels, and we may not reach it. And more importantly, is that actually we cannot stay at this 1.5 C degree above pre-industrial levels. We actually have to reduce the GHG emissions in the atmosphere that we currently have ultimately to get back to as near as possible to pre-industrial conditions. So what that means is that we need to look at a responsible adaptation measures that are urgently needed to help populations and ecosystems around the Earth to cope with the current climate change impacts. And we need responsible mitigation of greenhouse gas emissions to curb further emissions and ultimately, as I said, get to pre-industrial levels of emissions and ultimately to pre-industrial levels of temperature. We need that in order to be able to have a flourishing planet within, I don't think we'll have it by 2050, but within a reasonable time frame, and very importantly, for a long, long time, for generations to come. We need to have that type of environment, that type of conditions of our atmosphere for the well-being of people, animals, plants, all organic life forms, ultimately for a flourishing ecosystem, a healthy and flourishing planet. And what I'd like to really point out is we have to take the long-term view here. Short-term solutions are exactly that, short-term solutions. We need long-term approaches that will carry us forward for hundreds of years. So why do we call our initiative Planet Positive? What is Planet Positive 2030? So it's essentially a global open initiative that's focusing on finding practical paths to achieve a sustainable planet, a flourishing planet, a Planet Positive future, we call it, for 2030 and beyond. We use 2030 because we can, even though I talk about a long-range view, we cannot push off or put off solutions and actions into the long term. We need to act now in order to achieve that long-term vision of a flourishing planet. And positive, Planet Positive, refers to the fact that we have been depleting the planet. We have been taking more out of the general resources of the planet than we are giving back. And in order to get to a planet positive, to a flourishing future, we actually need to give back more. We need to regenerate ecosystems and not further harming the biosphere and the planet. Ultimately, using circular economy principles and regeneration to achieve a flourishing planet. So John Havens really is the author, but he put out two impossible goals. We had many debates why we should call it impossible or not, but it gets people's attention. So, we should maybe really believe into and really strive for very impossible goals to achieve them. So transform society and infrastructure to achieve planet positivity. We do need to change infrastructure to get there, and we do need to change attitudes and behaviors to get there. So it may sound as an impossible goal, but really we all realize that that's what we need to do. And as a second item is to identify the technological solutions that we need to design and innovate and deploy. So some of them we may have. Actually, I'm sure we have quite a few of them, and we need to deploy them much further, much more widely, maybe use them in different ways. But I'm sure we also have some gaps that we need to address, and hence innovate and deploy those as well to reach this planet positively and to get on the way of achieving the 2050 goals for net zero GHG emissions, because if we do not get quite a ways towards the 2050 GHG emission reduction targets by 2030, then we are not going to get to the 2050 targets. On the side here, you see you're invited to join. We like more and more people to join us and like their input and their contributions to add to achieve these two goals. So why IEEE? As you saw, I emphasized the technical solutions because that is the wheelhouse of IEEE. Many of these solutions will depend on solutions for energy because, of course, by using fossil fuels, we are generating a lot of these GHG emissions we talked about. And many of the solutions depend on information technology, telecommunications, etc. So both ICT and energy are really at the core of the IEEE activities, and hence IEEE has been taking on this initiative. A few words about IEEE. It's a well-known trusted source of technical information. It is known for standards and evaluating and testing and convening, networking at all levels around the globe, and of course, facilitating of communities of interest as they come about. Essentially, the Planet Positive initiative, Planet Positive 2030 initiative is one of those facilitations of communities of interest. IEEE has global reach with 420,000 plus members within 160 countries. We have 46 technical societies and councils. I alluded to those already by mentioning energy. So we have a power and energy society, a communication society, a computer society, and so on. And one of our big strengths, we have a large young population as members, 100,000 plus students around the globe, for example, and many young professionals. We also feature great technical breadth. And the discussions and the contributions are made through about 2,000 annual conferences. It was last year the first time that we had more than 2,000. We have close to 6 million technical documents in our digital library, IEEE Explorer. And we have about 200 journals, transactions, letters, and magazines, about 40-odd magazines within this publication portfolio. And out of those, about 8 of the 10 top-cited journals in electrical and electronics engineering are published by IEEE. There are about 2,000 standards. Of those are about 2,200 active standards, like 802.11 Wi-Fi standard, etc. In recent years, IEEE has been focusing more on social impact, with global public policy, humanitarian efforts, continuing education certification, all the way to ethics and technology. In other words, ethically aligned design, and John Havens knows all about it. He led on the staff side this big initiative. So the projects then are to build a compendium. We call it the Planet Positive 2030 compendium, strong sustainability by design. So this compendium is comprised of essentially 12, 13 chapters, I think 12 now, that are addressing various aspects of sustainability based on ecosystems. So we have an ecosystem committee working on its contribution on cities, on towns, on lakes and rivers. And one of them is ocean and coasts, and Christopher Whitt is here to represent that today, where we are talking about water. There are some overarching chapters as well on guiding principles, metrics, human wisdom, etc. But the big approach is to look at the problem within an ecosystem, as opposed to from a sector, like an industrial sector, or from a discipline approach. The second part, the second project, is to look at accountability. Can we design an accountability or an assessment framework that we would call accountability or accountable sustainability by design? It being really important that whatever measures we take, that we can take, that we have metrics, that we have key performance indicators, and report back on how well we are doing with the different measures that we are taking, so that we can actually change direction if we need to, so we can make evidence-based decisions. And Dr. Farouk, your data is going to be essential for any of those. So the whole initiative is based on the experience that essentially was gathered by working through a long process, a very productive process, looking at ethics by design in the AI field. And we're taking essentially the same approach for sustainability with this initiative, taking a multidisciplinary system thinking, change management approach. In this particular case, we have been taking a backcasting approach with the different groups, looking at what we imagine 2030 should look like, what would be our preferred vision of the planet in various aspects by 2030, and then taking a view of today. So where are we today? Where would we like to be? And go to then determine what we need to do today in order to get to this envisioned future of 2030 and beyond. The contributors that we have working with us are from around the globe, from many different disciplines. There are about 400 participants from 20 plus countries. We would like it to be more. and hopefully we can get to a factor of 10 by the end of the year, when we go through a public input process. And I think who are really the writers are numbering about 100 for the various chapters in total. One of the key pieces of this compendium is that technical concepts that are included, solutions that are included, are expressed in ways that are accessible to the public. It's very important that we use language that is accessible rather than hiding behind quote unquote big words. If you're interested, we have a list of bios, and please have a look and see who is working with us. I mentioned already that from the IEEE point of view, this is very key. IEEE is focused on providing, advancing technology and innovation for the benefit of humanity. That's actually our mission statement in a nutshell. And so IEEE volunteers from around the globe will provide input towards the technical aspects of these pragmatic solutions that we're looking for to achieve planet positivity. And these are the chapter headings, preliminary headings. And we already changed one. We had oceans and coast, and in the meantime, it really has been brought home to us that we should talk about one ocean. So it changed to the ocean and coasts, because there is only one ocean, right? So these are the various headings, and you see that we are focused on ecosystems in particular, and then have some global topics that support these chapters focused on ecosystems. I'd like to point out that long-range plan is to build a sustainability commons, or also called a technical knowledge commons, that's building on the Creative Commons to accelerate sharing of freely available knowledge around the globe to communities, so that ultimately we can accelerate technology adoption. And the second part I talked about was the accountable sustainability by design. We have identified one tool so far. Well, they have actually identified a few others, but this one is a key one. And it's called a basic sustainability assessment. It is aimed at small and medium-sized enterprises to track their course through becoming more sustainable in their practices. We do have tools for reporting behaviors of companies that are rather costly and often require consultants to carry out. That is essentially out of reach of the small and medium-sized enterprise and means or organization. And so the idea is that we would ultimately have a standard for reporting for small and medium-sized enterprises, so that that part of the supply chain can be reported on in terms of sustainability assessment and GHG emissions assessment, etc. As we are moving towards sustainable supply chains, we have to address the need of the small and medium-sized enterprises to be able to report in a reasonable fashion. We also have a standard that's working on the well-being impact assessment, which is at 7010-220, and maybe you would like to have a look at that as well. There are other standards under development, and if you're interested, we're happy to work with you. John, you wanted to talk about the progress we have made. Would you like to take over here? and I will move slides.
Sure, thanks, Micah. We're really trying to focus on community interactions with this work, recognizing that since we're creating a first draft of strong sustainability by design and accountable sustainability by design, in general, that's how IEEE works. It's consensus building and participatory. So along with these workshops that we had, one at Stanford and one in Delft in the Netherlands, we also feature monthly town halls, and we're trying to now make those maybe be 2 or 3 times a month, where while we're adding people to the community in between different breaks and when we're writing documents, we can have people get to know each other. A key part of what we're doing is recognizing that along with technical expertise, which we're really excited to get from IEEE experts and folks outside of the IEEE community, is a recognition that there's a lot of people, obviously, since we only have about 100 writers, who we really love to hear from in our feedback, our RFI request for input phase, which will happen approximately May through July or August of this year. And that includes more young people, people from around the world, indigenous communities, marginalized communities. Really, it's our work is not as much about saying, here are the answers, as saying, here is a first step. We'd love your thoughts and insights. And then the first edition of the document, as Micah was pointing out, will be released in November or December of this year. Next slide. And thanks, I have a little bit of allergies. Really, we kind of already touched on most of this. In mid to late May, you can go to our Planet Positive website. You can see the URL on the bottom left-hand of the screen, and you'll be able to download for free our document, Strong Sustainability by Design. And we'll provide ways for you to provide feedback that will also be publicly available, meaning the actual feedback. We want people to see what people are saying about the work so that we can have a larger community based on the feedback received. And then committees will do their best to implement that quickly. And then the first edition is what we're calling the first non-draft version of Strong Sustainability by Design. Will be released, most likely, this is the goal, it's a tight editing schedule, but at a wonderful conference called IEEE PES IAS Power Africa. This is happening in November in Morocco. Next slide.
Okay.
I think that's it. Micah, we're going to introduce Chris now, right? Is that correct?
Actually, we were going to go to the vision.
Oh, okay.
So, this committee Ocean and Coasts. Actually, maybe Chris, talk to this one first. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you, Micah. We put this quote at the beginning of our chapter, and there's probably a number of quotes we could have chosen to say a similar thing, but it is interesting to see how highly this is recognized. And I think we all know that the ocean plays a crucial role in the achievement of the SDGs and the livelihoods of billions of people, and we urgently need to change how we interact with it. So that's from the UN Secretary General. Next slide. And so here, the next thing in the chapter is our future vision, and this is where I'll hand it back to John.
Well, thanks, Chris. What we've done in each of the chapters of our committees, in each of the chapters for Strong Sustainability by Design, which Micah talked about, is we're using a backcasting, what in business is often just called a scenario planning mindset. Engineers also do this, where when you're planning ahead, you say, what's the world going to look like a year from now, or 5 years from now, or 10 years from now? And I've done a lot of research, or there has been a lot of research done on how people most quickly sometimes can hear and really take in messages about sustainability. And as you might guess, it's not just about hearing facts. It's also not typically about kind of scaring people. You know, although the messaging from yesterday's updated IPCC report, for instance, can feel overwhelming. Overwhelming people gets them to shut down. There's a lot of great research from a number of books. There's a wonderful climate research organization at Yale University that shows that storytelling is a great way to engage people where essentially they can start to picture themselves as heroes of an epic journey. And right now we all have the opportunity to be a part of the epic journey of helping our planet. The difference with what we've done from, say, a pure science fiction or fiction idea is we've asked Chris and the other leaders who are kind enough to write the chapters to say, as scientists, as experts in your field, please, write a vision of what 2030 will look like if we achieve these goals. And again, the goals are staying under the 1.5 degrees and in general, trying to maintain 30% of the world's land and 30% of the world's water, the sort of 30 by 30 by 2030 logic that came out of the COP Biodiversity Conference in Canada. Okay, so all that said, what I'll ask you to do, and maybe you haven't been asked to do this yet today, is if you're comfortable, go ahead and close your eyes. I used to be an actor, so Chris and Maike were kind enough to indulge me. I'm actually going to read the future vision that Chris and his wonderful committee put together. And I have on my phone, I'm sure it won't sound as good as the ocean you're used to, but I have an app that I use when I go to sleep that plays ocean sounds. But go ahead right now, if you would, if you're comfortable, wherever you are. We'll keep this slide up, and I'm going to read for about 5 minutes. But if you will, picture an ocean setting that is important to you. And again, you can close your eyes, take a deep breath through your nose. What are the smells that you have here? Probably that clean, crisp air, the salty brine smell. Maybe the people you're with, ancestors, loved ones. Maybe your feet are in the water. Maybe it's warm. Maybe it's cold. But either way, the logic here is that now you're going to hear about, written by Chris's committee, the fact that it is 2030. And now if you could also imagine that you are in 2030, it's 7 years from now. And here's the future vision from the Ocean and Coast Committee. It has been an incredible decade. The fact that the ocean produces half of the world's oxygen has evolved from obscure science trivia to common knowledge. The world has been educated about the ocean's influence on people and their influence on the ocean, inspiring grassroots groups of citizen scientists to organize globally, collecting data on ocean and coastal change, resilience, diversity, population, and economy. Society has met the 30 by 30, 30% of oceans protected by 2030 goal. A definitive map of the ocean floor is complete. Circular economy practices have moved from an emerging field to a central principle in both the private and public sector. Broad investments in process improvements and waste stream mining have resulted in 100% reuse and recycling of plastic. And nearly every jurisdiction has eliminated the use of single-use disposable plastic items. Where goods are not able to be produced locally or nationally, they are transported via green shipping. Wind, wave, and current-driven renewable energy projects along the coastline now produce and buffer a substantial fraction of the electricity to power society day and night without relying on carbon-based fuels. Ocean and coastal-based carbon dioxide removal strategies have been proven and are being built on a scale that will soon be able to remove carbon dioxide at rates comparable to the residual carbon output from human activities. There is now a clear economic and technological path to removing the human contribution to the rate of change in Earth's climate. Coastal desalination plants powered by salinity gradient energy technology provide abundant clean water and clean energy to areas where fresh water is and used to be scarce. Sustainable aquaculture provides an important food source for global populations. Coastal communities are aware of and exposed to only a reasonable level of flood risk through a sustainable, defensive, nature-based solutions and managed realignment. The residual risk is managed by robust, advanced early warning systems in place and democratized globally. As impressive as these technological achievements are, what is most meaningful to the average person is that the ocean is visibly healthier. Their favorite beaches no longer have garbage washed up from offshore. Ocean economies are booming as biodiversity has rebounded, leading to increases in everything from whale watching to recreational fishing. Protected coastal wetlands and mangrove forests both make coastal communities safer and provide beautiful recreational spaces. Events and trends from the early 2010s precipitated a profound change in maritime shipping, which have long-reaching positive consequences. The Fukushima nuclear disaster in 2011 caused early retirements of many nuclear power plants in favor of natural gas over coal and other forms of power generation, causing thought about energy security. The COVID-19 pandemic upended supply webs and society in general for nearly 2 years, from 2020 through 2021, causing thought about supply web security. The invasion of Ukraine in 2022 interrupted supply webs again and brought forward thoughts on how to assure geopolitical stability. And the US-China relationship, already tense for more than a decade, became a prominent issue in 2023. These events began pushing forward a new consensus on economics, energy, food, and geopolitical security that effectively began a seismic shift in new supply webs and trade patterns. The growing importance of climate change became a permanent priority as well. Shipping is a graphic example of the change. As of 2030, as of today, we are seeing the first generation of truly advanced ships that have zero emissions, more efficient trade patterns, and a new breed of ship operators that are working either as part of or considered as a high-value, critical piece of organizations that use ships instead of low-cost, minimum compliance subcontractors. Simply stated, society cares about the ocean here in 2030 and interacts in an ocean economy like never before. Thanks, Chris and Maike. Over to Chris.
Thanks very much, John. So I guess I've been given this time to talk a bit more about what I hope we all already agree on, and that is how important the ocean is to sustainability. You probably know that the ocean provides the basis of livelihoods for millions of people. Marine phytoplankton account for half of the Earth's primary production and nitrogen fixation. What I didn't realize until I started this project was that the deep ocean accounts for 90% is actually quite a conservative number. It's a vast majority of our long-term carbon storage. Ocean ecosystems provide coastal and storm protection and opportunities for tourism recreation. Seafood is essential for food security and also for energy security. About 1/3 of our global hydrocarbon production is from offshore, and in the future we could expect about a similar proportion of renewable energy to come from offshore. The ocean economy was predicted 7 years ago that it, by 2030 could double to a value of more than 3 trillion and provide approximately 40 million full-time jobs. We also probably are aware that the ocean has been an integral buffer to the climate system. It's absorbed about 30% of all excess human CO2 emissions to date, which is about 700 gigatons, which has led to a corresponding increase in ocean acidity, linked to all kinds of biodiversity implications. And the cycle of energy between the ocean and the Earth's atmosphere is what drives the global climate. That you can think of an analogy of an engine and a fuel tank, and the ocean, if the atmosphere is the engine, the fuel tank is the ocean, and the fuel in the tank is increasing. Again, a conservative number, over 90% of the excess heat energy that's been kept in the Earth's climate system over the past 100 years has been stored in the deep ocean. The number that I see in reports is on the order of 400 zettajoules. So if you want to challenge your SI knowledge, look up what the zeta prefix means. It's very, very, very big. Don't hold me to this, but I believe the comparison was something like the equivalent of 3 Hiroshima-sized atomic bombs going off every second since World War II, or for the last 80 years or something like that. So that thermal stress in the ocean has all kinds of wide-reaching implications. That's including sea level rise, deoxygenation, coral bleaching, increased storm formation, sea ice melt, polar migration of animals. It intensifies thermal marine heat waves and also interrupts physical processes like currents and mixing. Why, who's affected by this? Well, essentially almost everyone. More than 600 people live in coastal regions less than 10 meters above sea level, and nearly 2.5 billion live within 100 kilometers of a coastline. And those regions are typically experiencing higher than average population growth and urbanization. The ocean provides 20% of animal protein for about half the world's population. And in some places, especially developing nations, that's the proportion is much higher. We know most goods and services are transported by sea, and it's not just those living in those coastal regions affected by the loss of biodiversity, the increasing storm hazards, the sea level rise, and the impacts on food security, energy security, and other ecosystem services. An important point to touch on is that studying the ocean is significantly different than terrestrial science. We all know that the ocean is a very harsh and unforgiving environment, but it's important to recognize that it's also opaque to electromagnetic waves. So most of the things that we see on land, most of the advances that we take for granted these days, just don't work in the interior of the ocean volume. GPS does not work underwater. Radio, Wi-Fi, satellite remote observations can only really interrogate the top couple of meters of the ocean. And we often can't easily measure properties internal to the ocean unless you send a ship there, or maybe in the future it might be a robot or autonomous system of some kind. But that means that our data, the data volume we've got, the number of measurement points, the times coverage, and the spatial coverage is many orders of magnitude less than what we are used to in terrestrial science and other areas of science and technology. So you've often heard the soundbite that we know more about the surface of the Mars, or sometimes they say the surface of the moon, than we do about the ocean. And typically what that soundbite is referring to is a detailed bathymetric map of the ocean bottom. Because we've got satellites in orbit around the moon and around Mars, and we have very detailed maps from visual observations and radio observations. When you open up Google Earth and you see a nice picture of the blue globe, and you see the contours below the ocean's bottom, what you see is extremely coarse. The resolution is many kilometers, and that's derived from satellite gravity measurements, which are extremely low resolution. The proportion of that ocean bottom that's mapped by detailed high resolution maps is been increasing dramatically in the last few years, but only 10 years ago, it was around 6% of the ocean bottom. And now I think we're pushing 20% because there's been a very concerted effort by a particular organization to change that. Next slide. So that's just one example, but that lack of a detailed map of the ocean bottom affects all kinds of things. It affects the ability for us to generate and verify detailed ocean models. And again, because of that data problem, we have to rely on modeling much, much more in the ocean than we do in other areas for both physical processes and biological processes. And those things inform marine planning and resource management. They affect policy, they affect ecosystem restoration efforts, and all kinds of economic development. So throughout that entire volume of the ocean, we have extremely limited knowledge of where, in detail, specific physical and biological things occur. Those models I mentioned, they are improving, but we're still limited by that data gap to bound the errors in the model and to validate their accuracy. It's like you can kind of imagine the ocean as a black box, and we can measure it around the edges pretty well, but inside the box, we kind of look through a straw once in a while and we see something, and then you try to infer from that what's happening everywhere else. It's really, really quite challenging. Probably equally as important on the regulatory and policy side, there's a lot of challenges because of the connectedness of the ocean, yet the disparate regulatory regimes and boundaries, and then large areas of international waters with low or no regulation, we have a large challenge ahead in effective and adequate monitoring and protection of all of the ocean ecosystem. Hopefully you've heard about the recent High Seas Treaty. That's a crucial first step, but it's only a first step. Like any UN treaty instrument, it's purposefully vague and leaves a lot of room for wiggling, because you have to get everybody on board and sign, and it's only a starting point. It's not the end goal. So next slide, please. How can standards help? And standards, of course, are not exclusively IEEE's domain, but this is one way we hope to be able to help. On a purely technological level, we can drive down the cost of automated systems and sensors. Like I mentioned, those things will be essential for the in situ measurements we need. But it's not just for better ocean science. It also can enable more efficient transport, more affordable renewable energy, and food production, and lots of other things. We also find it useful to realize that standards and policy frameworks can be complementary. There's rules needed for certification and navigation and operation of uncrewed vehicles of all kinds. Right now, we're dealing with little robots that are mostly science instruments, but we're on the cusp of much larger scale automation in many big commercial sectors. And so the standards around the technology and the policy frameworks that regulate the technology have to be compatible, and they have to work across multiple jurisdictions. A really good example of this is climate change mitigation. Every pathway that we have in the IPCC reports that limit global warming to the 1.5C target assume the use of carbon dioxide removal on some large scale. And ocean-based CDR technologies are pretty immature, but as I mentioned earlier, being the largest sink of carbon in the ecosystem by a wide margin suggests that the ocean might be a really good part of the solution. But there's a huge need for measurement and validation and verification of the technologies and the impacts of using those technologies and where they get placed and how they get regulated. So, it's a challenge, but it's also a huge opportunity. Next slide.
Here we go.
There you go. That's it. Back to Maike.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, John. Thank you very much, Chris. Well done. So I guess, Frederick, it's up to you.
So I wanted to reference what I shared in the chat, which is the Highlands to Ocean initiative that our colleagues from the Transboundary Twin Network are working on. I'm going to share my screen again, and you're more than welcome to read and tell me how you think you could help. So this is being presented as we speak to the UN. It is an initiative to potentially put together a UN convention to protect river deltas. So everything you just referenced, all three of you, is very much in this same spirit. It is being presented this week to people close to the UN Secretary General and to the folks who determine how these conventions are actually born. So we're on the ground floor, if you will. The colleagues who were here this morning that I think, Maike, you heard, Susan Scorbati from Bennington College, and Asim Zia couldn't be with us. He's from the University of Vermont. They are being tasked and tasking themselves to actually get this done. So I want to make sure it's on your radar so that potentially IEEE can be part of this, since it is an initiative that needs to happen right now. And it is potentially going to be its own convention to be called Delta Unite. to build coalitions to protect these river deltas. And the way this is done is definitely by, again, using the triple helix, academia, which is originating this, political leadership, the UN and national governments, and of course, business and industry. And that's where IEEE comes in, because you're a professional organization with connections in all the different key industries that need to be at the table. So I wanted to make sure this was on your radar. And again, today's event is meant to be a living platform of putting together the right people around these projects that need to accelerate, because I'll share with John what I shared with everybody this morning, which is in the chat. There's only 82 months left until 2030, until that date where we're supposed to have put in place our SDGs. So we have to put everybody around the table to make sure it's hands on deck, all hands on deck for action all the time, everywhere. This is my personal motto. And I know you both share it, and we're trying to make sure as many people as we're connected with share it, because we have all the tools, we have all the solutions, and it's really a question of putting them together in motion with everybody. I'm gonna see if my colleague Fanny, no, she hasn't reconnected yet. She's with the water puzzle workshop, which I've mentioned to you before. She's gonna try and come and preview this for us. I will share their web page with everybody right now. And it's one of these tools to make science understandable to everybody. It is derived from the climate fresque, la fresque du climat, the climate collage, which I think mentioned to you, John. So it's the same idea. It's taking IPBES, IPCC data and organizing it into a deck of cards, which you're then asked in a workshop session with a facilitator to reorder by causality. So it's based on all of the relevant science, and it's collaborative education, it's collaborative intelligence, collective intelligence, which I know you guys like a lot. So I've invited Fanny to come and present. I think she's an hour behind, so actually it's going to be, let me see if she can connect now. Because she'll be able to explain this to you live. And the idea, again, is to do this in groups. So this is an activity that can be done both in person and online, but it would be interesting to look at this as something to do with your groups as part of these monthly meetings that you're trying to accelerate the rhythm of. Let me see if she can connect. While we do this, I'm gonna just shut down the recording.